All right, Dr. Brandt, we are live and good to go.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to the meeting of the Delta Independent Science Board. And in accordance with federal, state, and local guidelines to protect public health and safety in response to COVID-19, this meeting will be conducted entirely via remote. And we'll take written questions and comments, and please email your public comments and questions to disb@deltacouncil.ca.gov. In your request, please indicate the agenda item in which you would like your public comment to be read. And if you prefer to provide oral comments and questions, please use the raise hand function in Zoom or email disb@deltacouncil.ca.gov to get on the agenda. Afterwards, please wait for your prompted to give your public comment and then state your name and affiliation before you start your public comment. And we will be limiting those to 3 minutes for public comment today in the interest of getting through our agenda. So with that, I'd like to take roll call of the board members and just state your full name and whether or not you have any new declarations. Steve Brandt, nothing new here. Jay?
Jay Lund, nothing new to declare.
Joe?
Oh, nothing new to declare.
Tom?
No new declarations.
Lisa?
Lisa Wanger, no new declarations.
Virginia?
Virginia Dale, no new declarations.
Diane?
Diane McKnight, no new declarations.
Bob?
Bob Nyman, no new declarations.
And Tanya?
Tanya Heikela, no new declarations.
Well, welcome everyone. So for today's agenda, we actually have a fairly full agenda. We have a 2.5-hour meeting scheduled. I'm going to predict we might even get done a little early, but we'll talk about the resignation of Jim Claren from the board and the next steps forward on that. We will talk about future reviews. We will get an update status on a couple of the current reviews we're working on. And we will also get a report from the council and from the science lead, Delta program science lead. I'm going to make a few changes in the order of the agenda. We're going to combine items number 7 and 8, which is a discussion of our future meetings and our future reviews. Combine that into one. And then I've asked the Delta lead scientist report, currently item number 5, to move till after our discussion of future meetings. And that's in the interest of some folks that may have to leave early. So without further ado, are there any public comments on the agenda?
There are none.
Thanks, Edmund. We'll move to item number 2, which is the chair's report. I really don't have much of a report. Most of my stuff will be involved in the actual agenda items. But I wanted to point out that as part of your Delta ISB meeting package, you have public comment letters from Regional SAN on their comments to the council in regards to the Delta ISB funding, and also California Water Research on the status of the Senate Bill 821, which reestablishes the Delta's independence and establishes an hour rate of compensation. I encourage you to read those comments because I think throughout this process, one of the, I guess I'd say heartwarming experiences we have any over the last year is the support we've received from stakeholders. And it's been really heartwarming again to hear comments from stakeholders. I just, as an example, point out the Regional SAN comment that talks about the value of our work in improving future scientific efforts and just our presence alone and helps improve the tone and quality of science in the Delta. And as you know, which we'll talk about a little bit, there was the a review of our reviews, which also highlighted a lot of our successes and I guess respect and in the Delta stakeholder and management community. And there is a 2-page summary of that'll be highlighted, I think, further on in the program. But that's all I have for my initial board comments before we move on. Is there any public comments on that?
Yes, from Deirdre Desjardins from California Water Research. Deirdre, your microphone is unmuted. Please unmute when you get the chance and affiliation.
It's Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research. And I just wanted to say it's been one of the more valuable experiences in my advocacy career, organizing support for the Delta Independent Science Board. There are so many people all up and down the state who support the Independent Science Board. And I will add that you also have strong support from Phil Eisenberg, who is the founding chair of the Delta Stewardship Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre. And I do believe that his commentary was distributed amongst the board members. Is that true, Edmund?
We did not get that shared through the ISB email account, so that has not been shared.
I thought Susan had sent that out to folks.
Yeah, Edmund, I quickly did that after I read the commentary, and it's my fault that you don't know that, Edmund.
Okay, thank you. We'll be sure to post that up in our public correspondence. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the next item, which is the resignation of Delta Independent Science Board member Jim Claren. I think all of you know that Jim Claren has resigned from the Delta Independent Science Board effective June 19th. And I think I want to publicly thank Jim for his last 1 year effort and service to the board. Just in the 1 year under our current circumstances, Jim has already made significant contributions to our reviews and sent us off on a number of new paths of future reviews. He's the one who came up with a whole lot of ideas about our forward thinking and where we ought to be going, and his creative thinking and sort of in-depth understanding of the Delta and the Delta needs will be sorely missed. I certainly, for one, am really sorry to see him leave, but I fully appreciate his rationale for leaving. I think in his discussions with me, and of course in his letter, he pointed out that he strongly supports the board. He thinks we're doing tremendous things. We've been able to do a lot of stuff even under the current circumstances, and he says that he was honored and enthusiastic to be selected as a member of the Delta ISB, but frankly disappointed to learn about his terms of service, change in terms of service after he was appointed. And he points out that the quality and the impact of the Delta ISB reviews and reports really reflect the substantial commitment of time that is made by the board members under original terms of appointment, and that the current terms of appointment make that effort more difficult to achieve. And so he found himself in a difficult situation of not being able to provide the sort of the rigorous analyses and thoughtful guidance provided by previous board reviews and reports, and in essence felt that he could not produce at the level that he and others would expect for such an important appointment under the present terms of service. He gave himself 1 year for things to, he gave, I guess, us 1 year for things to change to in terms of a level of appointment, and that year was up, and he went through a very difficult decision process, and but went ahead and resigned. I, of course, thanked him personally. He also has offered to assist in any way he can, given his expertise, if we ever feel that we would need any help. And I assured him we would. And so we will ask him to, I should say, volunteer again for the board. And he has agreed to do that. And he wishes us and the Stewardship Council future success. So with that, I think we need to start thinking about Jim's replacement. I have searched through the DNA records, and he does not have a clone as far as I can tell. So one of the things our board is that the way the process works is the Delta Science lead runs a search for new board members when we have a departure. And then once a candidate has been selected, that candidate goes before the council, and the council makes the decision for the final appointment. The science board really has two roles in this process. We're not involved in the search per se, but one of the roles we have I would describe as more or less a recruitment role, where we encourage our colleagues to apply for the position. We advertise the position, we circulate it amongst people who are interested and qualified and we think would make a good fit for the position. There are the second role that the board has is to provide guidance to the science lead on what sort of discipline we might think might best fit in when the person leaves. And when the last fish guy left, the announcement went out to hire a fish guy. And when the last watershed ecologist left, the board decided it was best to replace that person with another watershed ecologist. Jim's departure leaves us with a number of holes. And because if you just go and look at Jim's resume and look at the broad level of expertise he had, ranging from fish to phytoplankton to ecosystem modeling to climate impacts, as well as his experience in the Delta, it is going to be challenging to narrow down a discipline. But I think it's something we as a board should discuss as to, are there any disciplinary strengths or areas that we think we need to beef up and make a recommendation that to the science lead that this is an area that should provide a little emphasis. Clearly, some of the general characteristics of being national in stature and being having the time available to devote towards the board is important. So while you're thinking about disciplinary things, if there's anything we want to recommend, I also want to point out that there's a right after Jim retired, I contacted Laurel and talked about the timing of when we should be recruiting a replacement. And clearly the issue of our terms of service is an important criteria. And what terms of service we would be under. We currently, as you'll hear later today, it's in a evolving situation. We're hoping that by the end of this month, there will be a resolution one way or another. But until we have sort of a resolution or a statement of where we're going to be, it's probably prudent to wait on the search until that terms of service has been secured. And that way we can advertise, Laurel can advertise a position knowing how that person might be compensated. So Laurel, did you have any comments on this? Or are you going to deal with it in your report?
I wasn't planning on addressing it in my report today, but I will be taking notes on this discussion. I guess maybe one of the things I would add that Steve, you and I had talked about is that there were a number of really promising candidates for the last set of positions who might still be interested. And my plan is to reach out specifically to some of those candidates and encourage them to apply this time around. And I think that's really maybe the only thing that you missed, Steve.
Yeah, I know that when John Calloway did the last search, we had 6 openings, and one of the criteria was to have a balance amongst the board members. And with a complement of 6 people being added to 4, that there was a lot of flexibility in that choice, but it was also a challenge to make sure you had a balance going in. So I guess looking at that list of folks, certainly to recruit them again to apply, particularly if we have if Senate Bill 821 passes and things are changed. And but we look forward to providing any guidance. But is there anybody have any comments, questions, or thoughts about are there something particularly missing in our disciplinary breadth or depth?
Well, one area that Jim brought a lot of is local expertise. And I think you got to find the right person to have that expertise. But it's really useful to have, I think. Keeps us from becoming a little too academic.
I would agree with what Jay said, and especially local expertise on the nature of the food webs and which organisms are important and which ones are endangered, and what are the trophic cascades and how do they change seasonally. Just the depth of knowledge about not just those processes, but which organisms are the players here, and when did they show up or decline, or that just knowing that was so impressive to me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's something that's been coming up certainly a lot as recommendations in our reviews, as well as some of the forward thinking we've been doing. And I do want to reemphasize, Laurel, that something that we've always said is to make sure whoever is being considered can certainly afford the time for the board as things, if we think optimistically, we will be having a lot on our plate, and a lot of time will be needed. Any other thoughts? Okay, well, if people think about it a while, and if there's any other ideas, I'm sure Laura will be happy to take any kind of suggestions or things as they move forward. Any public comment on that topic?
There are none.
Before we end, any further actions that folks think we might need to do on this topic, or see how things evolve? I just did want to say that over the past several months, many months actually, I have counseled the council leadership on the expectation that there may be resignations. And I think I'm sorry to see it happen, but I'm hopeful that's the last, and that we can move forward. Okay, no public comments on this, so I guess we can move on to item number 4, which is the Delta Stewardship Council report. I think Susan, you're taking the lead on that. Susan Satayan.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to give you an update of council activities. Before I start the update, I'd just like to say a few words about Dr. Claren's resignation. I am saddened by his departure, and I do understand some of the reasons he made his tough decision. And I'm very grateful to Dr. Claren for all his contributions to the Delta ISB and for continuing to serve on the ISB as long as he did. And 2020 was an incredibly challenging year, filled with abrupt changes and unanticipated conditions in so many aspects of our personal and business lives. And I know the abrupt change in the Delta ISB's compensation structure caused deep frustrations and uncertainty and economic impacts. So thank you all for your patience and for your continued commitment to the Delta ISB. Thanks to efforts of many, there are so many supporters of the Delta ISB out there, and thanks to the efforts of those many supporters who value the ISB, we may have some more clarity and certainty about the ISB's employment and compensation structure by way of Senate Bill 821. So now I'll move on to a very brief update of the Stewardship Council. First, I'll ask, as part of this update, we'll have Brian Stanbrough give an update on SB 21, and Amanda will share the highlights of the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee meeting, which took place just yesterday. So is Ryan there?
I am. Good afternoon. Thank you, Susan, and good afternoon, Chair Brent and members. Pleasure to be back with you this afternoon. I am Ryan Stanbrough, the Council's Chief Deputy Executive Officer, here to provide a brief update on Senate Bill 821 by the Senate Natural Resources and Water Committee, which was recently amended on July the 5th. As you may recall, 821 previously did three things. Stated that members of the ISB were not employees of the Delta Stewardship Council, affirmed that members of the ISB shall continue to exercise their own scientific judgment and conduct their statutory mission independent of the council, and three, directed the council to contract with members of the ISB at an hourly rate equivalent to that of a research specialist 5. While the first two provisions mentioned above remain in the bill, the July 5th amendments do two additional or really impact the bill in two ways. First, it revises the proposed compensation to a rate of $150 per hour to be increased annually based on inflation and cost of living adjustments. And second, Senate Bill 821 now includes an urgency clause, meaning that the bill would take effect immediately upon signature by the governor. And if that were to occur, council staff would then immediately move to execute new contract agreements for each ISB member. SB 821 passed out of the Assembly Appropriations Committee on consent on July the 7th and is currently on consent on the Assembly floor. And just by way of process, should it pass off of the Assembly floor, it would head back to the Senate for a concurrence vote. And presuming it is successful in that vote, it would then head to the governors for action. And based on previous conversations with the author's office, the hope from the author's office is for the bill to be sent to the governor prior to the legislature's summer recess, which is scheduled to begin at the end of the day this Friday. Assuming that happens and the bill does make it to the governor, by then the governor would have 12 days to take action on the bill. And once again, the bill would become effective immediately upon signature should the governor choose to take that action. At this point, happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Ryan, I have two questions. One is I could be wrong in the dates, not that it matters all that much, but I thought it had passed the Assembly and then it was up for the Senate consideration on July 15th, on Thursday.
That's possible, Chair Brent. I'm looking at, it's quite possible that my tracking software is not up to date. Actually, as I look here, looking at a different source, you are correct. 7/15 it did. It is scheduled to be up in the Senate. Yes, 7/15, you are correct.
The second question is, assuming it passes and signed and goes into effect immediately, and this maybe is also a question for Susan, how long would it take before the contracts would be enacted?
Well, I think we could, I can say that we are currently preparing in anticipation in the event that the bill does get signed to reduce that amount of time as quickly as possible. I don't personally have a time frame that I can share today. other than the fact that given that the bill does become law upon signature, we at the council, on the council side, are doing everything we can to be as prepared and to reduce any delay or drag in between bill being signed and the effective date of such new contracts.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. Ryan has said it very well, actually. We are taking action now to make sure that we're as prepared as possible so that we can execute a contract within, at most, I'd say a couple of weeks of the bill signature, and potentially more quickly than that. So we are getting prepared to be able to act on the bill immediately.
Okay, good. That's fantastic. And it's not just me being anxious. We're scheduling our travel for August, and we're not sure we can travel under a state employee or a contract basis. And we can't get plane tickets. So, okay, thanks, Ryan. Any other questions? Okay, thanks a lot, Ryan.
Great. Well, I guess I'll go ahead and provide an update for yesterday's Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee meeting. Again, Amanda Bull, I coordinate DPIC. So yesterday during our summer meeting, California Department of Fish and Wildlife Director Chuck Bonham facilitated a panel exploring ecosystem-based management during drought. And so this panel included representatives from a number of different DPIC agencies, including Kathy Marcinovich from NOAA National Marine Fisheries, Rosemary Hartman from the California Department of Water Resources, and Michael George, Delta Water Master. And then we also had Chad Dibble, who also with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So committee members also heard updates on Delta science activities, including the Science Action Agenda, social science integration, and the 2019-2020 Delta Crosscut Budget Report. So I'm going to highlight just two of the agenda items. First, the drought panel. All of the panelists and Director Bonham really stressed the need for us to be considering drought as kind of this new norm. Rosemary Hartman from DWR noted that it's easier to plan for drought and walk back from those plans if there is no drought than vice versa. And Delta Water Master Michael George summed up the lessons learned from past droughts that other speakers also touched on, namely that response depends on credible, accessible, and shared data. Advanced planning trumps emergency response, and that we have more scientific data than we do have synthesis, but we're working on the synthesis. In terms of moving forward, all of the panelists, one way or another, touched on the strong role that collaboration plays in developing kind of our long-term planning and response. And then secondly, I just want to mention the fiscal year 2019-2020 Delta Crosscut Budget Report. We presented. This is now the second version of this report that we've put out. The report really was pulled together in response to findings from the Delta Science Funding and Governance Initiative, which included a call to better understand how we fund science throughout the Delta Science enterprise. It's still really too early in the data collection since we only have 2 years under our belts to really make any policy recommendations based on this information. But over time, we are optimistic that, with more years of data collected, we'll eventually be able to use this information in a really helpful way. So the report is now available on the council's website, and I'm happy to share that link with Edmund to share with all of you. And I also want to give just a humongous shout out to Edmund. He was very instrumental in pulling this together. He has just been an absolute rock in doing our QA QC, especially helping out with QA QCing it from the information from the other state agencies, and then working really closely with our federal partners, Reclamation in particular, to really make sure that everything was as accurate as it possibly could be. So, and we could not have done this report without Edmund at all. So big thanks to Edmund. And that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Amanda. Any questions from folks on? Okay, Susan, back to you.
Okay, yeah, so I just wanted to share a few highlights of our June council meeting. At the June meeting, Campbell Ingram, and he's the executive officer of the Delta Conservancy. He gave an update on the Conservancy's activities, of course, as they relate to the Delta Plan. And Bruce DeJaneiro with Essex Partnership gave an overview of an analysis that was jointly funded by the Delta Conservancy and the Council, titled Identifying Suitable Rearing Habitat for Chinook Salmon in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. Also, the Council unanimously approved moving forward on the funding of research projects selected as part of the 2021 Joint Delta Science proposal solicitation. And Dr. Larson can probably say more about that. And the Council also approved the Delta Adapts Vulnerability Assessment. And finally, the Council received an excellent update on the 2021 Emergency Drought Salinity Barrier. So for our upcoming meeting, much of it is devoted to a hearing on the covered action. Now, on day 2 of this month's meeting, the Council will be asked to approve a contract with California Sea Grant to fund postdoctoral researchers to support the Delta Independent Science Board for 2 years. So that's my quick summary highlight. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Susan. And again, thanks again for that postdoc support. That's going to come in tremendously useful to us. Any questions from the board? Okay, any public comments on this topic?
Yeah, we have one from Deirdre Desjardins from California Water Research. Your microphone has been unmuted, Deirdre. Please unmute and provide your public comment.
Yeah, it's Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research. And I have a question. So we have been looking very closely at what happened with the budget for the Delta Independent Science Board, and we hope that a full funding can be restored, particularly since there's a 25% reduction in compensation over 2019 to 2020. We think there should be some room for more staff support, which I think would be most helpful. So we did have a question. The $814,000 for this contract lumps in the Delta Science Fellows typically get $55,000 per year. So for 2 years, that would be about $220,000. It appears the other parts have to do with proposal review services and with that are done through contract with UC San Diego. And that's for the Delta Science Program. And then there's a second review that's, or funding that's for the Social Science Extension Specialist. So we would like some clarity on that, particularly because just funding for the Delta Independent Science Board reviews has been a real issue for this past year. And I think particularly with all the new members and having you taken office during such difficult circumstances, that we really want you to have as much support as possible. So my question would be, to the council, can you clarify what of this grant is actually for the Delta ISB Sea Grant Fellow support? Thank you.
Well, Deirdre, I don't have the details of the budget, so I'm unable to answer your question. But I can ask I don't know if Karen has the details or if we would need to look into that.
Yeah, I don't have the details of the budget in front of me, but it's something that we could look into.
Thank you.
I might add that for the contract with Sea Grant, we will be supporting 2 postdoctoral fellows for 2 years. And so a portion of that contract with Sea Grant will be 100% devoted to the ISB in that form.
If I might ask one more question, do the Sea Grant Fellows start in 2022, January 2022?
Deirdre, we are planning on advertising those positions in September. And my guess is January 2022 is probably pretty accurate given that timeline.
Thank you.
As long as we're on this topic, I think I can say this is that I've talked to Laurel too about the search process, and clearly largely the board members would be making the decision. So I would be looking for 1 or 2 other board members to join me in the search committee or help to prioritize those appointments. And if you have anybody that you know is interested, start sending them our way. Okay, anything else, Susan?
Nope, that's it for today.
Okay, thanks a lot. I had one question for you too, as the, have you scoped out what sort of specific requests you might have for the board over the next year?
Right now, it's the informal review of the science action agenda. No, we haven't scoped out any additional items, but you never know. It's summer.
Well, that we fully understand. There's things that come up all the time. We're just trying to scope out our plans. So thanks a lot.
Sure.
Okay, we're going to move on. Remember, we're moving original item 5 further back. So we're moving on to what's currently listed as item number 6, which is our updates on our current reviews. And we'll start out with water supply reliability. Jay?
It's coming. Thanks for your earlier comments. I'm still trying to rewrite parts of it, and particularly in the front end and the back end, to make it a little bit more accessible for more people. So hopefully this will be done in the next few weeks.
And Jay, that's the one that would, you have clearance now that when that is complete, that would go out for formal public review at that stage?
Yes.
For a 30, the formal.
That's my understanding of it. So I'm on the critical path and I'm just sitting there. I'm sorry about that.
So once those are in, then we could, it looks like we're looking at September for sort of an action item on accepting.
Well, I will probably miss the September meeting, because I'll be offshore in Southern California, I'm hoping. So I think more likely the October meeting.
Any questions or input to Jay? Okay, the next one is moving on to the monitoring enterprise review. And I think, Joe, are you taking the lead on this? You're on mute, Joe. Joe, you're on mute.
We are moving forward with the writing portion, the component 2 now. We had several meetings to looking at the questionnaires. Now, in fact, Jenica and Chelsea, they are doing, and of course, Edmund doing an outstanding job of putting these things together as things come, and they are being looked at, and some statistical analysis has been done. So it's moving forward, the writing portion now. We are meeting quite often, maybe once in 2-3 weeks now. So it's moving forward. I don't know the timeline. We haven't decided exactly, but things certainly are moving forward.
So Joe, we all have a copy now of a draft report, this 70+ page report. Are you looking for any particular feedback on that?
Yes, we thought, Edmund, you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, so as part of the meeting package, there is a very rough draft of the Delta ISB's monitoring enterprise review. It still has not incorporated the interview results fully, but that's just the current outline. Just so I think for today, if anyone has had a chance to look at the outline or recommendations or best practices, the general idea is if there's any big flags that you currently see in terms of the direction of the report, since it still is really rough draft stage, we're able to accommodate if anyone has any initial reactions to the structure of the report or the initial best practices or recommendations. So pretty much in terms of so the reason why they're divided up into recommendations and best practices, we kind of felt like the recommendations were things that were very actionable versus best practices were things that individual monitoring activities can consider as they're developing their monitoring activities. They're a little more abstract. So kind of like key monitoring concepts. So I'm not sure if any of the other lead authors of the report would like to elaborate on the current thinking of the report and any other feedback that they would like beyond a general direction and any comments on the recommendations or best practices.
Well, I'll make a comment or two. It seems like normally the next step in this process would be what we call content approval. And it's a general term, but what I would suggest that, and maybe Edmund drafting a little cover note to this for board members who have who want to have a look at this report, but the content review is sort of a broad overview. I guess one is the question is the package, does it have all the right chunks? Is there anything really missing in there? You know, like we're having the interviews, the findings, the recommendations, are the big chunks of the pieces there? And then the second sort of thing is looking at the recommendations. Do they seem right? Are there anything is there a gap, something you absolutely disagree with? And I guess the third would be, in this case, rather than findings, the best practices. Is there something in there that's a best practice that we've missed somehow, either in the material from ESSA or in our readings or the panels or the interviews, things like that. So, and another one that we often talk about too is are we addressing this to the right target audience? In every review, we talk about who the audience is and how explicit we should be in terms of our recommendations to a particular agency or group or something like that. And I would ask that same question here. Are we targeting the recommendations and findings to the right audience? Do we need to be more specific about making a recommendation is more specific or less specific? So that's sort of, and there may be other things, but that's kind of the basic gist I get in terms of a content approval. So I know we have this on the agenda to talk about in perhaps a more lengthy fashion, or maybe we don't. I'm trying to think about this, but in August. But I think that's sort of the thinking level, rather than having others dive in and start doing detailed editing. I think we're more looking at the big features or the content.
Just to add that, add one more thing, Steve, that we also discussed that we have all the inputs from agencies, the stakeholders, and so on. But also we want the committee members, the ISB, to think about their broad recommendations so that can be melded into the document.
Yeah, I don't know if it's worth discussing now, Steve, but to your last point, I wanted to follow up and hear more about this difference between recommendations and best practices. It sounded like those were aimed at two different audiences. And I just wanted to get a little more understanding of how those were divided, maybe some examples Do you want to explain? But tell me, Steve, if you'd rather have this conversation in August.
No, I think it's fine now, but I don't have the answer. Joe, do you or Edmund?
Yeah, I can kind of elaborate on that. So I can kind of provide some examples. So when we're thinking about recommendation, we're thinking of these as a more collaborative process that would involve like multiple entities. So a lot of it is focused on organization and collaboration, the need to, because one of the overarching goals of the monitoring enterprise review from the perspectives is how well is the information gathered from monitoring informing decision-making needs. One of the key findings from this review is that there hasn't really been a framework or even the questions that the monitoring should answer overall across the enterprise. So a lot of it is, a lot of the recommendations is kind of like step one, the recommendations that you have to develop and standardize and synthesize the questions in which you're trying to adaptively manage for. Because like one of the key, another finding is that a lot of these programs or activities have not been designed with adaptive management in mind. So those are kind of examples of recommendations. In terms of best practices, it's kind of like data should be accessible. So a monitoring activity or a monitoring program should have should include stakeholder engagement. So those are kind of like the what we kind of have in the best practices section versus the recommendations. So the idea is that the audience for the best practices, and we understand the recommendations are hard to implement in terms of organization and all of that. So the best practices can provide a monitoring activity, some context of what they should consider as as part of their program. I'm not sure if that makes more sense or if I created more confusion.
Not at all. It's very clarifying and it sounds great. So thank you.
Yeah, but please elaborate the other lead authors because I know I totally screwed it up.
The only thing I'll add there, Lisa, is that the recommendations are kind of framed as like the big moves of things that could be done. I think Edmund said this very nicely, at the more of the kind of collective level in the monitoring enterprise, whereas the best practices are things that any agency or actor that's involved in monitoring could potentially implement and could be doing right now. They're kind of framed more normatively, like this is what should be done. But the big moves are things that will require kind of more structural or institutional change to make them happen, if that makes sense.
So would it be fair to say then that a recommendation is that every monitoring program ought to adopt these best practices? Because when I think of best practices, I think here's a list of really good things we ought to all think about when we do things, but it's not, but there's no requirement to do so. And, and I'm just wondering, when I go through the best practices, some of those are like, makes sense that a monitoring program as part of their development or continuation of a monitoring plan should ask themselves those questions and should address those questions. If they're not dealing with stakeholders, why not? If they're not making the data available, why not? Should these be goals of each monitoring program? Are we moving in that direction, or is that too far to go?
It seems reasonable, Steve. I think that's worth putting out there. If we're going to say that these are best practices, then we should perhaps strongly recommend that they be implemented if they're not already. Some of them we did try to assess where they were being implemented to some degree or not, and we did ask some questions of monitoring stakeholders to try to get a sense of, is there some activity already around these best practices, and do people agree with them? And not surprisingly, there's some variance in those responses, but yeah, we could certainly encourage people to think about, if they're not already implementing some of these best practices, to take them more seriously.
So in engineering, these are kind of prescribed procedures, professional societies, prescribed procedures that are recommended, that should be seriously considered by the practitioners. So that might be one way to think about.
But some of them may not be appropriate for all agencies or all actors. And so you have, I mean, one of the reasons why we, I think, treated some of these as best practices is that they need to be contextualized. And so.
Virginia, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you guys have covered it pretty well. Thank you.
That is a pretty interesting point, Joe, that the engineers are much more rigorous about us saying this is how to create good data, or this is how to create a good model. And ecologists, I mean, a lot of these requirements come down through regulation, and they're underfunded, and there's been a little less of that perspective. So, the trade-off here is that money has to be available for the personnel to make them available and to process them. And so agencies often just don't have the money, or the person hours. But hopefully us laying this out, like you're creating data that's not useful because you're not doing the value added portion, that's an important statement to make.
Well, I would add to what Lisa said, that in the ecological research community is very much moving ahead in terms of good practices for data archiving. There's a environmental data initiative and NEON and other programs. So in order to integrate some of the monitoring activities of research organizations with state agencies, they all need to be functioning in that way where the data are there's metadata and it's archived in a clear way.
And in those cases, the funders are the ones that require that. So it's part of a research grant.
But maybe you've brought up something that maybe we can help with, in terms of there are tools that are used to make it easier to share your data. And if the states don't know about them, they may be imagining it's a harder lift than it is.
I think that's a very good point, Lisa.
Yeah, I like the idea of having, more specific examples and maybe some suggestions along those lines and how to do it. And in each of those best practices, but also the consequences of not doing it. And I think it's good to be reasonably specific, I think, in those. And because if we are saying it's a best practice, we're almost by inference, or if not directly, saying we recommend you do this, and here's why, and what the value of it is from a scientific and perhaps management perspective. And I do think a lot of that's already in there. We just need to make sure it's in there.
Yeah, and a lot of it, if it isn't fully clear, I think some of the best practices came from based off things that the ISB heard from seminars, the questionnaire, and the interviews. So they're trying to address some of those issues, in terms of public accessibility of data, better connection of the monitoring and the science management. So just keep that in mind as you're reviewing those best practices.
Hey, Joe, is there anything else you need?
Yes, just probably Chelsea or Jenica can kind of brief us very quickly about this coding. I think procedure is all done. Chelsea or Jenica, you want to make a quick comment?
Sure, I can do that. Hi, everybody. So Jenica and I finished our qualitative analysis of the interview transcripts, and we compiled the findings, the results, into a relatively short document. We were trying to balance capturing and summarizing overarching themes, but then also providing the richer and in-depth data that's really the forte of qualitative of interviews and qualitative research more generally. And so the coding categories adhered to the coding framework that we developed previously with the ISB MER writing team, and answered to questions about key management needs, existing gaps, and barriers to addressing those gaps. And then also there was thematic areas focused around coordination, strengthening coordination, and reorganizing the monitoring enterprise, and then also just capturing people's suggestions for addressing challenges in that regard. And so we've shared that document with the MER writing team, and we had a conversation about how to move forward integrating those results into the full report. And Jenica and I are certainly happy to continue to provide support and resources as additional questions come up. And I'm happy to take any questions now if there are any.
Chelsea, I had one question. If I recall, in your report, you also included some quotes. Yeah, it seems that if in our adaptive management review, there was a lot of I want to say effective use of quotes and as examples. And so I would encourage. Do you think there's quotes in there that we should use? I would encourage folks to look at those, or if there's others that come up that might be reflective of some of the feedback you're getting.
Yeah, definitely. We tried to pull out the really illustrative quotes, the ones that got to a point very succinctly or that phrased something in a certain interesting way. So hopefully we've kind of provided you good material in that report. We highlighted those in blue so that they'll be easy for you to locate. But if there's an additional point that requires clarification or that you think would be effectively illustrated by a quotation and you don't see it there, certainly let us know. We can go back to our spreadsheet, our coding spreadsheet, and the interview transcripts to look and see if there is other material that we can provide you.
Thanks. And anything else, Joe?
Sorry, no further. I mean, sorry, I couldn't unmute. But yes, I think we are good there.
Okay, great report. Any other comments from the board? Questions? Any public comment on this, Jay, or Edmund?
Yes, there is one from Deirdre. This is for the water supply reliability review. Deirdre, your microphone has been unmuted.
First, I wanted to say that I greatly appreciated the introduction to the water supply reliability review, emphasizing the importance of ecosystem water supply reliability. They're thinking that all three year classes of, or the year classes of fall, spring, and winter run Chinook salmon will all be wiped out this year due to running out of cold water in Shasta Dam. And it puts particularly the winter run in real danger of extinction. The second thing I wanted to say is there's an open data law. This is regarding the monitoring enterprise review that was passed in 2015, and it requires state agencies to publish data sets that they get state funding for on on data.ca.gov, and a lot of those data sets are now being made available. I think there could be, I believe the water board has the staff that are working on that. There are staff who are looking at it. I believe the data could be better integrated. And the last point, which is something I feel some guilt about, is there was a very high conflict situation with the state water board's hearing on the water rights change for the Twin Tunnels project. The hearing started in June of 2016 and went through fall of 2018. I participated in it and provided expert testimony for Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Association and Sierra Club. And we did use some of the data. I also used it for cross-examination of some of DWR's operators. And one of the things I noticed was we looked at salinity, extreme salinity intrusion in 2014. And there's a website called Bay Delta Live. And after I got that off the website and saved it, and we introduced it as an exhibit, I noticed they changed Bay Delta Live so you couldn't go back and look at historic salinity intrusion anymore. So it was just a consequence of introducing data into this very controversial environment. And so there may be some of that tension. I think generally there's some very good data sets that are still made publicly available, but we've noticed that with data sets that are provided by the Department of Water Resources, and I think it would come from their attorneys. So it's just something to bear in mind. It's a reality of California water work.
Okay, thanks, Deidre. Any comments, questions? Diane.
I wasn't quite clear on your last point. Are you saying that there were data that were posted that were used in a court hearing, and then because of that, they were taken down and no longer available? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Well, it was a historic, so Bay Delta Live has a map of salinity intrusion, and it's really wonderful. And you used to be able to go back and pick any particular date. And then after I used it in the hearing, suddenly it wasn't available one day. And I don't have any inside information on why it wasn't, but there were a number of other things that happened as well.
Thanks for the clarification.
Okay, thanks, Deidre. I think we're done and can move on to items number 7 and 8. And 7 was a discussion of future review activities, and 8 is preparation for upcoming Delta ISB meetings, particularly August, and I think they're connected. I first wanted to start by saying that also in your packet is a 2-page summary entitled Stakeholder Perceptions of the Delta Independent Science Board. This is a 2-page summary, including the bar graphs of some of the perceptions that we heard about a few meetings ago from the review of our reviews. And Jay and I felt these are very positive results and would like to see a wider distribution, including to anyone who might be helping us to do anything, to have some background information on what stakeholder perception was. So we had a conference call actually Friday, July 2nd with Lauren Hastings and Chelsea to see if they could put together a 2-pager for us on this. And I really need to thank both of them for doing that and getting it out over July 4th weekend, holiday weekend for us. And I know Chelsea was at our meeting while she was on vacation and did the work during the holidays. So I really need to thank her for that. This is a very important for us, and I encourage all of the board members and anyone else to circulate this document widely, because I think it is something that is useful for folks to realize what the stakeholder perception of our reviews are as we consider future reviews down the road. Now, you recall that report, the verbal report, also said that our reviews are good. People are listening to them, paying attention, they're highly respected, and we should continue them. During our discussions, we also talked about possibly narrowing them down a bit and completing them in a shorter time frame than we have in the past. The other thing that report suggested is that maybe we should, to be even more effective, we should have more discussions with major agencies ahead of, maybe before we start the reviews and when we finish the reviews, so that we get that connectivity from the very beginning onset to the very end. So as sort of a, as we wrap up our remaining 2 reviews that we have, and as we see some lights at the end of the tunnel, we need to start thinking about what sort of reviews we might want to be doing. So one of the ways we thought about doing that was, let's talk to the people who are doing the science. And Edmund, if you could put that that slide up. Now, this is from that from Amanda's discussion of that that funding effort that was done. This is a summary of science expenditures by different funding agencies. And the idea was that maybe we should create a panel that would bring in those folks that are spending the most money on science in the region and ask them a series of questions. Number 1 would be to provide a brief overview of your organization. What does it, what's the science component of your organization, and how your organization supports adaptive management? What are your science goals? Do you have a science strategic plan? And what are the most challenging science issues you see in the next 5 years? And then how can our reviews help and assist you? So in essence, what's your science goals? What are you doing? What do you think is most important? And what are your science plans over the next 5 years? That would give us a really good breadth of the majority of this ongoing science in the Delta. So what we thought we would do is we would invite the top 3 state agencies and the top 3 federal agencies to come in August and bring in their the person who's leading the science and ask them those questions. So that would include the Delta Science Program is one of the state agencies that's listed here as the council. The CDF&W and DWR from state agencies, and from federal, it's Bureau of Reclamation, National Marine Fisheries Service, and USGS. And we have identified individuals from each of these folks to come in and give us about a 20-minute presentation followed by a 20 to 25-minute discussion on that topic. And that will be the bulk of our August face-to-face meeting. And again, the purpose of this is to find out what's going on from the people that are supporting and doing the most science in the Delta, and what their goals and priorities are. And also provides for all of us a good sort of a background of the scientific effort that's going on in the Delta, covering a wide variety of topics, I am sure. And so that's kind of the face-to-face component of that. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions or comments? Okay, so the way the August meeting is evolving, and I don't know if Edmund, if you have any other graphics to go with that in terms of our field work, but the idea is to meet face-to-face. I think we have, I think 7 members who have pretty much agreed they can do it, and 2 members are, I guess one in Jay cannot make it because of his, he'll be on travel. 6 other members said they will be willing to meet face-to-face there, and 2 other members are working on their schedules and contemplating to join us as well. And largely it is to meet face-to-face and get to know each other a little better. But the second component is to get out in the field. A big component of what the Delta does is to go out into the field and meet with stakeholders, get a sort of get our feet wet, so to speak, to see what the Delta is all about. And it's particularly true of all of us, but also true more so of the new members as well. So the idea is on the August 19th, which is a Thursday, to spend the full day out in the field. And Edmund, did you have a map you were going to show us? Edmund, are you there?
Yes, let me pull it up again. Sorry, I was having technical issues with that. So hold on.
So the idea for Thursday, August 19th, would be to start off at 8 o'clock and spend all day leaving from Sacramento, but all day in the field visiting a variety of places, which Edmund will talk about. End up back in Sacramento Thursday evening, and then Friday morning, we would start our face-to-face meeting, which would be, again, if someone feels uncomfortable actually doing a face-to-face in a large meeting room, we would certainly be able to entertain video conferencing as well, I believe. And the idea is we would end that meeting no later than 2:30 on Friday. So those who, a number of people would then be able to fly back if they wanted to on that Friday afternoon and make it back in time. So that's our current thinking. Is that overarching schedule seem okay with folks? Anybody have any difficulties, other suggestions?
I think it seems good. And as someone traveling from the East Coast, I appreciate having a day to adjust to the time a little bit. Having the field trip first is better than diving into a meeting room in the afternoon. So thank you.
Yeah, we think everyone who said they were going to come in, were going to come in on Wednesday evening. And so they would all be here in time for that Thursday departure. And Edmund, did you want to talk a little bit? I have a schedule here, but did you want to talk a little bit about the what we currently have planned?
Yes, I can do that. So on the screen, you see a map of the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta, Sicilian Marsh, and the Yellow Bypass. And this was prepared by Jenica. So thank you, Jenica. And we'll be sharing this as part of your field packet. But this is just a general overview of what we have planned. So this is where Sacramento is located in the context of the Delta. You'll see in a black line right here, that's the legal boundary of the Delta. So on day one, we're planning to take Highway 160 to travel on the western side of the Delta. We'll be making stops along the way. As we travel this route, we'll be passing some legacy towns like Walnut Grove, and we'll be making a brief stop. We won't have a tour speaker here at the Delta Cross Channel Gate. This is a facility operated by the United States Bureau of Reclamation, which pretty much controls flows into the interior Delta or the Sacramento River. So there's an opportunity to learn a little bit more about this facility. But pretty much the cross-channel gates are open and closed at various times of the year. And there's some regulations in place of when they should be open or closed in the fall when salmon are present in the system. So flows can be on the Sacramento River. So as we're traveling along Highway 160, our first stop will actually be Dutch Slough. If you read the restoration review and the active management review from the Delta ISB reports, Dutch Slough has been like has been a frequent project that has been mentioned. The ISB has visited this before, but this is one of the largest tidal restoration projects in the Delta. And we have a speaker lined up from the California Department of Water Resources who will provide a little more information about the Dutch Slough Tidal Restoration Project, which is being implemented to help restore habitat for Delta smelt. Then during the break, then we're going to head back around noon Pacific Standard Time for a little lunch break at the Big Break Park. So if you saw some of Steve's presentations, you saw us on this big map of the Delta. That's where Big Break is located and where we were last time. So this will just be a lunch break for us to view the Big Break Park. And then in the past, they've talked about health advisories of harmful algal blooms, so that could be a potential topic. I believe there is an advisory out right now at Big Break. Then as we move back in the afternoon, we're going to go to Sherman Island. Sherman Island, some of the things that we could talk about at Sherman Island is that there's a levee setback project at Sherman Island, so there'll be an opportunity to see what a levee looks like. There's some carbon sequestration projects at Sherman Island, and I know in the past when you guys talked about future reviews, subsidence reversal projects have been something of interest. And Sherman Island is also a location where fish are released after they're salvaged at the Skinner Fish Salvage Facility, which is operated by the California Department of Water Resources. So when flows come down into the Delta towards the Banks pumping plant, fish are salvaged or saved, and then they're trucked out to Sherman and where they are released. So it's an opportunity to learn about that at this location as well. And then we're going to drive back to Sacramento and hopefully be back by the evening on Thursday, if that's the plan. So that's a very general overview, and I'm not sure, Jay, if you want to elaborate a little more since we worked very closely with you in planning our activities.
Well, that sounds like a good tour. You'll see a lot of things.
You'll get a much better overview as we approach closer to August when we have our tour speakers lined up.
Thanks, Edmund. Any other questions for him? And again, Friday is entirely, as I look at our schedule now, entirely devoted to the panelists. We're still trying to lock in those panelists. And with an immediate follow-up question, hopefully when they're still there, a discussion of future reviews and what they think might be valuable, and have some discussion of that later in the early afternoon part. Okay, and right now then, that's it for August, and that's a face-to-face. I've asked Edmund that if things change as of the Senate bill, he will get back to you and begin to talk about setting up an annual schedule where we normally meet face-to-face every 2 months. And I'm hopeful we'll be able to go ahead and do that. And I did want to mention too that the field trip is basically an official public meeting, but we also, we don't just stop and go out into the field and wander around. Usually there's people there that know the area and give us a little brief presentation and give us some real insight as to what's going on and what the key topics are. And we have a chance to have discussions in each of the areas that we normally stop in. And I thank Edmund already and for starting to organize that, and whoever's working with him. That's a big job to do. Any thoughts, questions? Okay, Edmund, did I miss anything on any of that?
I'm glad that you covered preparation of future meetings very well. Thank you.
Any public comment on these?
There are none.
Okay, next we move to the, which is our last main item on the agenda, is the Delta Lead Scientist report. Laurel?
Thank you, Steve. And let me just transition to screen sharing here. Okay, and hold on, I just have to move my Zoom window out of the way and start the slideshow. Okay, so Steve has asked me to talk about a number of different items in my 15 minutes today. The first one is really quick. Basically, will there be any review requests beyond the science action agenda review that originate from the Delta Science program within the next year? And the quick answer to that is no. I would just echo what Susan said earlier in her report out. The second item we'll go through is just a quick science action agenda workshop report out. As many of you know, the science action agenda science actions workshop is currently taking place today and tomorrow in the morning. Thanks to Lisa and Tanya for being participants in that workshop. In a moment, I'll do a brief report out on that. I'll also report on the research projects that have been awarded funding through the 2021 PSN. Then I'll go into a research spotlight of a paper that Jim Claren and co-authors recently put out on the human appropriation of wetland primary production. And it's, you know, with a mixture of sadness and appreciation, given his recent resignation, that I have this as an agenda item in this group meeting. And I would echo Steve and others and just thanking Jim for his service and his extensive contributions on the ISB over the past year. And then finally will be a quick update on the Delta Science Program's assessment of Delta ISB reviews. So just briefly on the science action agenda, this slide provides just an overview of the whole process for updating the science action agenda, along with a website that you could go to access any of the details or documents that have come out thus far in this process. The science action agenda is active for a 4 to 5 year period of time. And again, this really sets the priorities for funding targeted foundational research throughout the whole Delta science community. The science action agenda consists of discrete science actions that are responsive to broad management needs. In the past, we've gone to the community to solicit management needs and then crafted science actions that are responsive directly to those needs. With this update to the science action agenda, though, there's been a new step. So this process really originated with going to the community to solicit management questions relevant to particular agencies and topics. And I've reported on this before, but again, we started out with 1,300 management questions, which after a workshop and series of surveys and synthesis by Delta Science Program staff, were finally distilled to a list of top 65 management questions that are available on this website. More recently, the Delta Science Program staff have grouped and synthesized those management questions into a set of 6 discrete management needs. Again, these management needs are broader topics. And the science actions in this workshop are being crafted to be responsive to those 6 management needs in light of the more specific management questions. Now, the other factor that's being considered in crafting these science actions is gaps in progress on the last science action agenda. And those gaps were identified through a separate process, which was an assessment of progress made on the last science action agenda. So Delta Science Program staff curated a list of over 300 science activities that were funded through the 2017 to 2021 Science Action Agenda, and then ranked each of the science actions in that SAA according to whether they had achieved significant progress, moderate progress, or early progress. And draft science actions were created from those early progress items. So today, the science actions workshop really consisted of brainstorming sessions spread across these 6 different management needs. And in fact, there were 8 different breakout groups. 2 of the management needs had a lot of management questions associated with them and were broken up into 2 separate groups with distinct focuses. We had over 100 registrants for the workshop. And each of these breakout groups was working on a mural board that looked a little bit like this. And this is just the snapshot from my particular breakout group, which was focused on understanding interacting effects of multiple stressors in multi-benefit socio-ecological landscapes. So what you'll see are a reminder of the management questions that are pertinent to that management need. And then all the action was really taking place down here in this science actions box. These mural boards were pre-populated with draft science actions from a survey. And then today participants went through and made notes on these actions, grouped them thematically. So you'll see we have a lot of draft actions associated with food web and invasive species, frameworks that integrate human components and biophysical components in these multi-benefit landscapes and contaminants. So this board is still a little bit messy. There's a lot of wordsmithing and revision that needs to be done, but the groups tomorrow will really be focused on refining those science actions and prioritizing them according to their importance and relevance. So moving along, let me see if I can get my computer to advance here. Okay, I'll segue into an update on the awards that we made through the last PSN, which is related to the science action agenda in the sense that all of these proposals needed to be directly responsive to the 2017 to 2021 science action agenda. So just some overview type numbers here. We announced this opportunity in November 2020. We received 99 proposals requesting $63.9 million in funds. This was a doubling of interest over the last proposal solicitation that we had. And the council has ended up awarding $9.6 million in funds, which is actually, it jointly originates from the council and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, which were our partners in this endeavor. The state water contractors have also contributed additional funding for additional partial funding for one of the projects. The proposals were reviewed through several rounds consisting of an administrative review just to make sure they met all of the minimum requirements. They were sent out to solicit ad hoc reviews. And then the 99 proposals went through 3 rounds of panel reviews, each of which covered 33 different proposals. And it was conducted very much like an NSF style review panel, in case you're familiar with how those are run. And then those panels designated a subset of the proposals as being highly competitive for funding. And among those highly competitive proposals, we internally made a selection that considered factors such as diversity of topics funded, relevance of those topics to the most salient management needs, and ensuring that we were funding a diversity of investigators from different institutions as well. This graphic just gives you a quick snapshot of who submitted proposals. These numbers here are contracting agencies, contracting entities, and the ones that were selected are in orange. So you'll see that we had national and international representation here, and the package does include a pretty good diversity of these types of institutions. This word cloud gives you a basic idea of the topical areas of the proposals that we received. So you see restoration here is the most prominent, followed by modeling, salmon, water, and ecology. And again, amongst the proposals that we funded, we worked to ensure a balance of these topical areas that in turn corresponded to a balance in the science action areas that they addressed. In some, we awarded funding to 16 total proposals, 2 of which were this new category of integrated socio-ecological systems awards that were required to be multidisciplinary and were higher budget proposals on the order of $1.5 million. So in terms of the content of the proposals in our package, I first of all want to give credit to Dylan Stern and Henry DeBay and Emily Reisner for putting together this beautiful graphic summarizing the topical areas across the spread of proposals that we're funding. But there were 7 projects that supported science tools to inform the management and recovery of migratory fishes. They included 2 projects that address harmful algal bloom drivers, trends, and impacts. And I want to particularly flag these because if the Independent Science Board does eventually decide to pursue a review that's relevant to HABs, this work would be informative. Also included in the package are 5 projects that address multi-benefit wetland habitat and delta food webs, and 2 projects that address sea level rise and subsidence reversal. The projects use a range of tools and methods ranging from state-of-the-art real-time sensors such as flux towers and pigment sensors to innovative new eDNA methods to rescue of archival and historic data sets. So I think in the interest of time, since I only have 15 minutes, I might skip through the individual proposal highlights. If you're really interested in that, I'd encourage you to watch the recording of the council meeting in which Emily did a really great job of profiling those individual proposals. But I wanted to make sure I had time to cover this recent paper that Jim lead authored in Science of the Total Environment on primary productivity within the Delta. So as many of you are aware, there are questions of how much of the decline of managed species in the Delta is due to broad scale landscape conversion versus other factors like flow diversions and nutrients. And also questions of to what extent are those negative impacts reversible by restoring wetlands? And these are questions that are really difficult to answer in the Delta. This difficulty arises in part from the fact that here, unlike counterpart systems like the Everglades, Chesapeake Bay, and Southern Louisiana, such a tremendous fraction of the original wetlands have been lost. And it might be that the benefits of wetlands for many of the species that we're interested in managing for might not be apparent until a threshold coverage is reached, and we might still be far from that threshold. So as a result, the value of wetland restoration has been a bit difficult to demonstrate, which has led to a lot of uncertainty and debate about the role of wetland restoration in topics such as the ongoing voluntary agreements negotiations. So in the synthesis study that was led by Jim and co-authors, they set out to quantify how loss of these historic wetlands has influenced total primary productivity within the Delta, and more specifically, the infusion of carbon into the base of the food web, so specifically carbon available to herbivores. The authors first synthesized data from the scientific literature in order to quantify average rates of primary productivity in 5 communities: phytoplankton, attached macroalgae, aquatic plants, marsh plants, and woody riparian vegetation. And they did this separately for wet years and dry years. And then based on that information and the distribution of those communities among 5 different types of habitats, and you'll see those habitats here in the different colors, they constructed a model of primary productivity and applied that model to the historic landscape, which they reconstructed based on historical mapping. And this gave them a historic baseline. Finally, they developed estimates for habitat coverage in a Delta for which all of the restoration targets specified in the Delta plan had been met, and they applied their model to that hypothetical landscape in order to evaluate how the target amount of wetland restoration could improve carbon supply to Delta food webs. So I'll just hit the highlights of their results here. One is that based on their historical landscape reconstruction, they found that the Delta has lost 77% of its hydrologically connected habitat, with more than 98% of its tidal and non-tidal marsh area lost between today and the early 19th century. So marsh plants produced an order of magnitude more carbon in the historic landscape than any of the other community groups they examined. So that 77% loss of marshland translated into a 94% loss in primary productivity across the Delta and an 89% loss of food supply to herbivores. In terms of the reversibility of those losses, if all of the habitat targets for marsh and riparian restoration in the Delta Plan are met, they estimate that we would recover 12% of the Delta's historical primary productivity. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but considering that this number nearly triples the carbon currently available to the food web, it could potentially make substantial gains for consumers relative to current conditions. So finally, one other interesting point that I'd like to flag in this paper that's particularly relevant to the current drought situation that we're in is that the portions of the landscape contributing the most to primary productivity have been substantially reconfigured, which has big consequences for the variability of food supply from year to year. So historically, primary productivity was primarily sourced from plants in marshes and attached algae. Now that is mostly gone, but woody plants are a relatively large contribution in the present system behind open water, which, by the way, was the smallest contributor historically. What this means is that the difference in provisioning of food to the food web now, unlike in the past, swings drastically between wet and dry years, governed by that inundation of the woody riparian zones and their reconnection to fish habitat. So in other words, wetlands could potentially play a large role in making the Delta food web more resilient to drought. And I will take your questions, but the final agenda item that Steve asked me to cover here was the updated timeline of the Delta Science Program's review of the Independent Science Board's reviews. And as Steve mentioned earlier, you do have this 2-page summary of stakeholder perceptions of the Delta Independent Science Board now available as part of your packet. I grabbed those bar graphs directly from that. The team does plan to make a summary of findings relevant to the ISB's future planning available for the August 19th meeting at the latest, and a public draft report available for the September ISB meeting. So thank you, Steve. I apologize if I've gone a little bit over, and if there's time, I'll take any questions. You're muted.
Okay, thank you. And for a very informative report. I had one question on the proposals. Are those 2-year projects or 3 years or a mix or what, the grants?
They are 24 to 36 months.
Okay. Any questions or comments for Laurel? Okay. Oh, Diane.
Diane, this one.
So I was wondering if these two larger interdisciplinary projects that you mentioned, did they come from that category of California universities? Where were they from?
So let me just go back to sharing my screen because I do have snapshot overviews of those two projects. And let me just go back to those. So they do both originate from California and included, if I'm not mistaken, a mixture of different institutions. So one of them was led by Dr. John Takakawa here. Let me just go ahead and share this. Oh, weird, I went back there. Sorry. So John Takakawa is from the Sassoon Resource Conservation District. I believe this included at least one university partnership. This was one of the multi-institutional projects. But this project is really focused on the management of Phragmites. And the work draws on a national scale team to tackle the problem here of getting private landowners and other groups to work together to confront Phragmites, realizing the power of collective action. This is a really interesting proposal because I would say the comments from the review panel just really stood out here. They were incredibly enthusiastic about the likely positive impacts of this work on the practical challenge of managing Phragmites. And some of the key outcomes here included establishing an integrated pest management approach for Phragmites, highlighting barriers for collective action, and also developing communication tools for regional management. And then the second one is a proposal that really came out of the Collaborative Science and Adaptive Management Policy Group, or CSAMP. So this is one of these interagency teams that has addressed the challenge here of recovery of migratory fish. So research to date here has not sufficiently improved population outcomes or been synthesized. The management of migratory fish frequently has been guided by just a relatively small community of agency managers and the interested public. And this project is being led by Renee Henry of Trout Unlimited. And it takes a refreshing and robust approach by involving a diverse set of stakeholders and then marrying that input with state-of-the-art monitoring or modeling tools in order to co-produce solutions for salmon recovery that are based both on the community and our current knowledge of the species. It's a project that leverages a lot of existing collaboratives, including that Collaborative Science and Adaptive Management program that I spoke of. So it's not starting from complete scratch here. And then some of the key outcomes are developing an immediate and collaborative socio-ecological strategy for recovery of the Central Valley salmonids. And I believe Dylan Stern just chatted me the institutions for both of those proposals. So for the Phragmites project, there are several universities involved: Santa Clara University, Utah State, Purdue, Chapman University, and CSU San Francisco. And then for this project that you're looking at on the screen, it's Trout Unlimited, UC Santa Cruz, Flow West, the Bay Institute, Compass Resource Management, QEDA Consulting, and Cairns and West. So quite a variety of institutional types there. And thank you, Dylan, for that.
Thanks very much for that explanation. I was really interested to learn more about these too.
Yeah, we were really encouraged just to see the collaborations that were evident in not just the work that we funded, but a whole group of really strong proposals that we received. And I'd say, you know, having chaired these three panels, this PSN was just incredibly competitive, comparable to NSF.
Thank you, Laurel. Any other questions? Edmund, any public comment on this?
There are none.
Okay, we can move on to item number 9, which is a review of items for follow-up. Edmund?
Yes. So for agenda item 3 today, you guys talk about potential disciplinary areas or qualifications that you guys are interested in for the current Delta ISB vacancy. Steve, you suggested that if anyone has any additional ideas beyond what was discussed today, to send those directly to Laurel. For the water supply reliability review, Jay is still working to revise the draft based off the comments from the last meeting, and that report should go out for public review. The current target is that there be an action item at the Delta, or potential action item at the Delta ISB's October meeting. For the monitoring enterprise review, you guys currently have the rough draft of the report. If you're interested, please take a look at that report and perform a content review. With particular focus on, does the draft report have the right sections of the report? Do you agree with the recommendations and best practices? Is there anything missing? Is it addressed to the right audiences? And then I think one idea that was brought up at the meeting today was, as you guys are looking at the best practices, if you guys have examples on of how to implement those. I think things were like environmental data initiative was mentioned. So if you have ideas on those, and please include them in the report. For preparation for future meetings, stay tuned on when you guys can book your flights. And then you guys should be getting information about how do we organize our meetings through the end of the year if we're allowed to meet in person, and if you guys are back if we get resolution on Senate Bill 821. Anything that we would like to add to the follow-up items?
Oh, good job, Edmund, as usual. We can move on to item number 10, which is public comments for things not on the agenda.
We currently have no one raising their hand, so I think no public comments.
Okay, well, before I adjourn, I just want to thank everyone again for all of their support to the board in all of this process. I want to thank the board members for hanging in there and continuing to work hard. And we're making a lot of progress on our reviews, and really anxious to get back into the Delta. And I think all of you will enjoy your field trip in August. And I'd also like to, for the record, point out that we are about 40 minutes ahead of schedule. So thank everyone for being prompt, and we'll have a good rest of your week. Meeting adjourned.
Thanks a lot, Steve.